Here we go.
All right.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for a webinar on regenerative economies in Southeast Alaska. My name is Natalie Dawson, and I'm Executive Director of Audubon Alaska, which is the statewide office of the National Audubon Society. I'll be moderating today's discussion. I would like to acknowledge that Audubon does its work on the traditional lands of the indigenous peoples of Alaska, who have been the stewards of these lands since time immemorial. To set the stage for today's webinar, I'd like to have us all put a mental map in our heads of Southeast Alaska. It's a region of Alaska, the Panhandle, the southern region, that stretches over 800 miles. It consists of over 1,000 islands along the southern coast. It's home to 34 communities, most of them rural and accessible only by boat or plane. It's the traditional homeland of the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian indigenous peoples. The region's economy has shifted from timber to fishing and tourism economies in the last several decades. This year, 2020, was slated to be the biggest year on record for tourism. Over 1.44 million visitors were projected to come to the region, distributing over $800 million in revenue to the landscape's communities. However, COVID-19 and the current pandemic that we find ourselves in has grounded cruise ships, a vital part of the tourism industry within Southeast Alaska. The loss of this revenue is already being felt across the region. A number of national news stories have focused on the immediate economic challenges facing Alaska, and specifically Southeast Alaska. As recent as 2 days ago, NPR highlighted a report by the Ketchikan Visitors Bureau that reported 25% of local businesses in Ketchikan may not make it to 2021. How are Alaskans responding to these challenges? Each of our speakers that we'll hear from today is working on the immediate needs of communities and businesses with an eye toward the future. We're focusing today on Southeast Alaska in this discussion, but we hope that this information is helpful in building a national community of practice around adaptation, resilience, and regeneration for our collective future and a new way of thinking about business and economy. Couple quick logistics. I'll let each speaker introduce themselves, then I'll ask a few questions, and we'll keep some time at the end for questions from our audience. As a reminder, please submit your questions via chat, which is a button located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will ask those questions to our guests. Thank you, and with that, I'll hand it over to Mary.
Great. Hey, thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you, Audubon, for hosting this. My name is Mary Goddard. I am the Regional Catalyst for Regenerative Tourism in Southeast Alaska. This is a unique position with Sea Alaska and Allen Marine. And also, I am a small business owner. I make Tlingit jewelry, and so that's just a little bit about myself. Can't hear you, Zach.
Oh, I was the first one to do it. Sorry. My name is Zakary Kirkpatrick, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Allen Marine and Alaskan Dream Cruises. So Allen Marine provides shore excursions, primarily for guests of large cruise lines that come to Alaska. And Alaskan Dream Cruises does small ship expedition cruises, our largest overnight boat being up to 76 guests. And we really go off the beaten path to a lot of port calls that the large ships don't go to. But I was born and raised in Alaska. I'm from Juneau, Alaska. I'm the offspring of Swedish immigrants who came here in the 50s and became fishermen. And so my whole goal, my background in marketing and advertising from school, my goal was to get back to the place that I loved. And I landed here in a fantastic role. We'll talk about this, but we have a lot of challenges ahead of us. As I mentioned, we're involved in the cruise industry. Well, the cruise industry is virtually shut down. So we have worked, and actually alongside Mary, who works with our company in part and a native corporation, and excited to talk about some major challenges, but also potentially some opportunities today.
I think I'm next. Hey everyone, my name is Ferguson.
I live in Douglas, right at the border of the Occoquan and Takuquan territories. I work for Spruce Root. It's an Alaska Native-led community development nonprofit with offices in Juneau and Sitka. It was started by Sea Alaska 8 years ago as a response to declining economies in rural Southeast communities. At the start, Spruce Root focused on entrepreneurship through our business coaching and our loan fund. And then also on building the enabling conditions for entrepreneurs and for more resilient communities, which is where my work focuses, largely through our support of the Sustainable Southeast Partnership. Our big idea at Spruce Root is that we connect our clients and partners with diverse forms of capital, and our clients and partners use that capital to do great things for their communities. In my role, I pursue strategies to finance in traditional and creative ways community and regional economic, social, and environmental priorities and programs, including a nascent Indigenous Guardian Stewardship Network and an effort to work towards healing within Alaska Native communities of Southeast, both of which we're exploring supporting through philanthropy, carbon market dollars, and possibly through voluntary tourism payments. Thanks again for having me, and I'm excited to be on the call with everyone today.
All right, I guess I'm up. My name is Dave. I am a videographer, editor, and I guess producer on some small level. But yeah, I do video production. I am a local to the Alaska area. I say that because I move around quite a bit. I originally am from Chicago. I was living down, or I mean, I was raised in that area and did a lot of advertising down there for a while before Chasing Mountains came up to live in Alaska. And since I've been here, I've been doing a lot of outdoor stuff, but always took the camera with me. So, documenting adventures and of course just doing advertising in this area. And then obviously Alaska has a lot of TV shows going on. So that's employed me quite a bit, working with Weather Channel and most recently Nat Geo Wild. So Southeast Alaska, or Sitka specifically, is where I was working most recently. And I was working with the Alaska Raptor Center on a TV series that was for Nat Geo Wild, and just kind of really, even before that series started, was doing a lot of work with them and just with some other businesses in Sitka locally. But yeah, so at the very moment I'm in Chicago, I was trying to be close to family during the pandemic, and sort of got trapped down here. But I'm looking to head back up to Southeast Alaska very quickly, and I'm excited to get behind the camera again and to start documenting some projects that are filming some local businesses up there and highlighting sort of what's going on during this crisis. So yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate being included on this.
Thanks so much. Great to have you here. Mary, I thought you could start us off by giving us a definition of what a regenerative economy is, and feel free to explain that by using regenerative business and regenerative tourism as well.
Sure. Yeah, so I think when we're talking about regenerative business, it's doing business not as usual, which right now kind of fits in perfectly. When we're talking about regenerative business, we're talking about businesses that affect the entire system in a positive way, rather than being detrimental to one aspect of the system. So if we're looking at a business that's thriving financially and yet it's destructive to the environment or our culture, then we don't have a regenerative business. Yeah, but I guess in talking about regenerative tourism and business, Natalie, do you want to share with us what you guys are working on and how that's kind of an example of a regenerative business?
Sure. So Audubon, Alaska this year is launching a Southeast Alaska birding trail. It's meant as a regenerative tourism tool for communities across the region. The birding trail is virtual in that it's a website and hopefully soon to be a handheld app on your phone. So a visitor to a community in Southeast Alaska will have the ability to look at where places are where they can go birding in the local community. The information was built with 18 different communities around the region, with information from the communities, places that people felt okay having visitors travel. It's also meant to be used for within communities. And the idea behind the tool is that it creates a relationship between a visitor and the community in a very tangible way. So someone can walk, say a little further away from the cruise ship dock and explore other places in a community that may not be on someone's radar. We're already seeing that some local tourism operators are excited to use this trail with visitors as a way to bring people out in kayaks or have them visit local picnic shelters. And it's also being used as a way to structure rehabilitation projects on islands like Prince of Wales Island, where there's boardwalks and interpretive signs that are being built to help guide people to specific places on the trail. So the idea is visitors come to a community, they visit a community based on what the community has designated as important places for them to see. And in the end, the visitor walks away with this hopefully really strong sense of place of where they've been and care for that place into the future.
Gotcha, nice.
So I would like to ask each member of our panel to explain a bit about, under this framework of regenerative economy, regenerative business, can you talk to the ways in which your business is using resources in new ways that are responding to community needs on the ground right now?
Me first. Yeah, I think, Natalie, this crisis and our response to it at Spruce Root brings to mind for me the 3 R's that were implemented in response to the Great Depression as part of FDR's New Deal, which were relief, recovery, and reform. This is when we got the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration and the Social Security Act as part of the relief R, and things like the FDIC and the SEC to reform the banking sector and Wall Street. And now I would say almost 90 years later, we need these 3 R's again, and we need a 4th R, regenerate. Another way to think about this concept is to think about the alleviation versus root causes spectrum. There's fixing symptoms or alleviation or relief at one end, and there's systems change on the other, or addressing the root causes through reform. I think alleviation is about the beating the odds now, while systems change is about changing the odds in the long term. At Spruce Root, we think this entire spectrum of response is necessary. So on the relief, recovery, alleviation side, we've implemented deferral of payments for our loan clients, grants to community leaders in rural villages to implement responses that make sense to these communities. And we're pursuing other sources of funding for communities and entrepreneurs. We're also holding an emergency response workshop for tourism businesses coming up on June 10th. And on the regenerate side, or the reform side, we're still planning on holding Path to Prosperity, which is our triple bottom line business competition. Applications are due at the end of this month, so get them in. I would encourage you, all the participants. We're engaging youth in sustainable natural resource management workforce development programming this summer. We're pursuing funding to develop a food security and sovereignty fellowship. We're helping communities develop plans for more resilient futures. And we're supporting the Sustainable Southeast Partnership and the establishment of that Indigenous Guardians Network that I mentioned earlier. And I really think we need a regenerative green New Deal that addresses the root causes of the inequity and unsustainable practices that currently are in our economy.
Dave, I think you're on mute.
Oh man, I said such brilliant things. I don't know if I could do that again. Sorry about that. Yeah, so no, I think the initial the initial problem that I personally ran into as far as creating videos, especially with you know, just having pretty much just left town right before the pandemic started ramping up, was that I wasn't really able to be present. So you have businesses that, of course, and I'm just speaking about advertising in this from this particular angle, but businesses that need to you know, have some sort of promotion done, and they know that they need to have it done because this is a time where they're really, every business can be hit differently, but they're going to be hit. They're not going to get the same sales they want, so they want to be relevant and they want to be like in people's minds. So they want to be getting some, having some advertising done. I had at least one person who was like, you know, as fast as I can we get something done? And the problem was that at that moment, I wasn't able to jump on a plane and get there. And even if I had been in town, I don't know that it would have been the most prudent thing to go over there and film, you know? So I basically we had to sort of put our heads together and come up with what we could come up with what we had, and without going to this particular location and filming this individual and his business. So we kind of like, if, you know, you do have I don't know, any form of disaster, you know, a plane crashes in the woods, find out, you know, we all kind of accept the fact that we're not going to be sleeping in our beds tonight. So what do we got to do? We got to find a way to build some shelter. We got to find a way to accommodate ourselves during this crisis instead of just freaking out about it. So at this time, with him, I was able to pull up some old footage that I had shot for them before. He was able to provide some photography that also really showcased the product that he was selling. And we basically were able to put together a promotional video that really, I think, in my mind, sort of emphasized his selling a product online. And we were able to do that while I was in the Chicago area. So the immediate response that I've had to kind of shift was just to not be present and to work with what we had, but to continue to move forward, because doing nothing didn't seem like a good option. So that is what I'm starting to deal with, is, you know, unfortunately, talking with people who want something filmed and I can't be present. So it's like, well, you know, I can't be there for this particular time of the season when this thing is happening in Southeast Alaska. I'm going to get up there as fast as I can, but is there a way you can, that you can document this, and maybe we can put something together later? So logistical challenges right out of the gates are looking sort of like that. And that's how I overcame one of them.
All right, I believe I'm next. So I've just been kind of thinking about this question, and I think that it's helpful for me to set the stage first. So here's kind of starting with the bad. Allen Marine and Alaskan Dream Cruises are one of the largest private employers in the region, or were. We have up to 170 year-round positions, year-round full-time jobs, and 500 seasonal jobs. So over 600 jobs in the peak of the summer that we're employing. Because of the pandemic, we are facing October of 2019 to May of 2021, hopefully. So it's that 19 months of no revenue. And that resulted in I think, approaching 80% layoff or furlough, which was the owners described as the most painful experience in their 50-year history. What that does is it trickles down. Allen Marine, with so much infrastructure, we have over 50 large vessels, most of them 150-foot catamarans. And we do a lot of things. You know, we do benefit cruises and work with nonprofits, and especially schools, and helping not only with just direct donations, but providing transportation. And all of that now stands in really serious jeopardy. So all this stuff trickles down. So that's the stage. So now we sit pandemic is here. We have to look at opportunities, and that's where we're sitting now. We're an Alaskan Native owned company. And so a lot of the values that been talked about, like with Mary, we really value the small communities that we work with, like, for example, Cake or Metlakatla, Hoona, all these really small villages. And so we've thought, how can we use our assets that can, in a way that can help sustain the company, but also help? And so we've, I can't sit here and say anything is really landed yet, but we're actively talking with leadership and talking to tribes and communities about how we could have, for example, a supplemental ferry service. You know, the Alaska Marine Highway has had a lot of challenges. I use the word supplemental. We're not suggesting we become any sort of replacement to the ferry right now. We want to have like an emergency use, so that we've got villages talking to us about how they're struggling for freight, and the barges and ferry system, it's not enough. So working with the state and federal entities to say, what can we do? We have all these assets, and we can help people get to medical appointments. We can bring food and things that people need to sustain life. So that's one way that we're looking in this interim time. I call it a supplemental emergency ferry system. And it's been very well received by especially these smaller places. It's also a time to seek change. And I clicked on the comments and questions. I know we'll probably get to those later, but this goes along with one of those. We, of course, are in the maritime industry, and we burn fossil fuel. But here's an opportunity where we're, business has been decimated. And so we've worked with the federal government saying, is there any sort of grant? And we could get ourselves on the way of doing, for example, some sort of hybrid over electric vessel. And so then this stretches beyond the pandemic. If we can use this time, of course it's expensive. We'd need this to be, partly, at least in part, a grant program, but we can start making these changes in our fleet. Some of the vessels with engines getting older now. And so that's another thing we've talked about. I think that in answer to a question that might follow, these are all things that will extend beyond the pandemic, but perhaps it's an opportunity now. It will take identifying, financial grants and other things. It's not something that any company, I know other companies have ideas too. There's so much leverage being added right now. And we're not making revenue, so you can't just go out and do these things with 19 months of revenue, but perhaps there are lanes, and those are some of the things we're looking at.
Great, thanks for sharing, Zach, and kind of laying that groundwork, or that setting the stage, because, when thinking about this question, that's kind of the same thing that came to my mind. Is like, I've been working with Zach, Dave, and Aaron, all in different aspects for tourism prior to the pandemic. And it looked a lot different. Previously, before the pandemic was an issue, there was a lot of excitement around tourism and a lot of rush of, we need to get marketing out there. We need to get pictures. We need to get business ideas. Go, go, go. And for me, it kind of, I had to slow down and take a step back once tourism stopped, and pivot and change, and really listen to what's going on in these communities. What this pandemic has done is it has shone a light on the weak spots in our communities or our systems. And so being a part of a lot of meetings in with several networks that I'm part of, one of the things that it shone a light on was food security. And so I think what Zach was talking about is like, freight's not coming, stores their shelves aren't being filled. And so when we look at tourism, how could you have a really good foundation for tourism if you don't have a really good foundation in your community? And so I guess when I say foundation for your community, it could be whatever those systems are. So when we're looking at food security, it doesn't feel very secure, you know? So I think businesses can begin to look at, you know, how can they help and how can they kind of fill those gaps that need to be filled. And so like Alan Marine trying to step up and be that supplemental ferry system so that people get their freight in, or like working with Aaron and how we're trying to address some of the issues of, okay, 5% of our food comes, you know, from Alaska and stays in Alaska, but the other 95% is supposed to be shipped in. And so when we have something like this pandemic and it's just shining a light on that, and that gives us an opportunity to kind of step back and say, okay, how can we change the system? How can we be a support for the people in these communities that want to begin to build a business and provide those things? So I guess that's one way that I've been kind of using my resources differently, is really networking and trying to have a lot of one-on-one conversations with individuals in these smaller communities, and how they can fill those gaps and help build a strong foundation.
Great, thanks so much for each of those answers. Those were wonderful and inspiring. And kind of following on that thread, and a couple of you have mentioned this in terms of, you know, response to what's happening now towards stimulating what can happen in the future. I wanted to ask each of you if you could speak a little bit to the changes that you're making right now to adapt, if those changes are something that will continue past this time during the pandemic. So are there elements of what you're doing now that can carry over into future operations? Or is there learning that you're experiencing that you think you will be able to carry with you into the future?
Yeah, I think that's the opportunity within this situation is hopefully that we can learn something that we're going to carry over, because unless the world just plays in reverse and goes back to exactly how it was, which, you know, I don't know, I don't think it's going to happen that way. I think this is an adaptation opportunity, and even if it does go back to the way it was, there's going to be some things that I think that are going to be slightly different. So these obviously a crisis is a time to learn how to adapt and an opportunity for growth. And I think that is as far as, and just speaking from a video and promotional sort of standpoint, Southeast in general, and I guess, you know, a lot of businesses in particular, it's really, these businesses are going through a transition to some degree. I think that almost everyone is affected by this. And I think there is this sort of knee-jerk reaction to, because the message has always been, I think Mary mentioned this earlier, is like this sort of an invitation to Alaska, like, come on out, this is an awesome place. Even whether it's creating a video for a client as a promotion, or even just like documenting some sort of adventure that I'm going to put on YouTube that doesn't really have any direct promotion in mind. All of it is showcasing Alaska, and it's almost this direct or indirect invitation. That message is not really what it was, and it's not necessarily, I mean, there's so much, I mean, that may be a thing, you know, someone may be able to come up responsibly. I'm not sure yet. This is all still evolving, but that message, at least at the moment, is something that it has to change to some degree. So I believe that moving on is not saying we'll stop the message and we'll just stop producing video and we'll just wait for it to go back to the way it was. I don't think that that's what we do. I think that we continue, from my perspective, and with you know, with the tools that I'm using, which is a video camera, is to keep recording during the crisis and to start telling stories that are relevant. If it's the story of a business that is going through some sort of metamorphosis to like do something very clever to serve its community, or to continue selling product, even if it's now we're moving to online sales, or if it's like we're literally going into hibernation mode. And in the meantime, like Zach was talking about, we're going to help the community. I think all those stories are inspiring and they're super relevant. And if you lose relevancy as a company, you're done, right? So like going into hibernation, even if you have to like stop your company as it was, I think it's still important to have the story out there of what you're doing and how you're helping the community, how you're surviving, what the plan is. If you have clients and you're reaching out to them in a different way, tell them that. If you're telling them that, like, you know, keep us in mind because in a year from now, we're going to be able to serve you, that's great. Or even if you are just serving the community, people are sitting at home, they're locked inside and they are loving, but they are like, they're watching video is what they're doing. They're looking for inspiration. And I think that it's very important that we capitalize on this time to showcase a business and have them tell their story if that's all they can do right now, because that's worth something. And people want to hear positive stories of survival. They want to see people pulling through this experience. And if your next customer is not walking in the door for another year, you certainly want them not to forget about you. So the storytelling during the crisis is extremely valuable, and even maybe more valuable because over like the troughs make the peaks so much higher, and to miss the opportunity to showcase what's happening during this time is I think would be a loss. So that's the direction that I'm thinking the video should move in showcasing businesses and telling their stories.
Am I up? Sorry, I lost track of the order here. All right, so I think I answered a bit of this question in my previous answer. And so I don't know if I'm breaking the rules here, but I think a lot of the questions that have been coming in and some steered towards Allen Marine build on this. One that popped up was about the hybrid electric fleet changes that I mentioned. And the question was, is that technology available right now, or just something being talked about, or there steps being made? I'm aware I'm not the best person to answer this question, but I'm aware from our operations team that there are technologies out there. Obviously, I'm not talking about, it wouldn't be feasible to do this thing on just a large scale fleet-wide change, but if we can identify things right now, and if we can get grants right now to take, one or two of our vessels and look further into the technology that our ops team is aware of, and anyone's aware of, if anyone out there can help steer us in this, then that's something we're interested in, because we know that, these green solutions are fantastic. And so in answer to that question, I don't know all the specifics, but I do know there are things out there, and we're very interested. We've made that clear to our congressional delegation as well, and to some of the maritime commissions. And then I just wanted to talk about, so we talk about a lot about the current state, or what was the current state of tourism last year and the years previous to that. One thing that Allen Marine and Alaskan Dream Cruises has really been trying hard on, and this is exactly why we formed this link with Sea Alaska and Spruce Root, and Mary's position popped up, because we said this is, and speaking for the owners, not for myself, but from the owners of Allen Marine, this is their ancestral homeland. And we say this is more than what we do for a living, it's our ancestral home, Alaska. So we have taken through Mary and through some things we've been involved in, really having heart-to-heart discussions with Kasan, with Cake, with Yakutat, and it seems like almost all small communities now, and saying the tourism is beginning to expand. There's smaller expedition ships starting to come into these places, but here's the thing. We want to do this. We don't want it to be tourism is imposed upon your community. That's the wrong way to think about it. We want to think what does your community feel comfortable with? And sure, are there places that say, oh, we're comfortable just not seeing anybody? Yeah, there's a few of those, but many people see that actually there's an opportunity to do it at our own pace, do it at our own scale. And not only does it bring revenue into small business owners, in our communities, artists and, people making, some of the communities, they're making huge batches of cinnamon rolls, and or a youth from the area comes down and plays the fiddle on our boat, and it's fantastic. People love that stuff. It's authentic Alaska. And not only does it bring revenue in, but then in the case of especially a Native community, they can share their culture, which is also important. So I think that is a huge wave of the future in companies like Allen Marine or other tourism companies being all ears to these small places, and then helping to facilitate the advantages of the visitor industry that we can bring through our connections. And then, I've been thinking about just a lot about that word, listening. And it seems cliche, but I think when we think about regenerative tourism and these smaller places and even the communities that have a lot of tourism right now, it's just businesses listening to each other, listening to concerns, and working solutions.
Great, thank you, Zach. Really good point on the listening. Aaron and I had a discussion, I guess last week or the week before, on some of the projects that we're doing. We're investing in people, and so when we're talking about the work we're doing now, will it last and will it continue on? Most definitely, because when you invest in people, those are the things, they're the ones that are going to make things last in their community. And kind of like along the lines of what Zach is saying is, like, when we're bringing tourism in, we're not hoping to go in and say, this is how tourism is going to look in your community, or, tourism, they want the authentic experience. And so if you're investing in people that are investing in their communities, they're going to shape the communities they want. And if the locals are enjoying it and they're enjoying business and they like it, tourists will too. I think when we're talking about tourism, I think what people are looking for now, at least the trends and what I'm learning, is that people want authentic experiences. So when we're talking about like even food security and working on those issues and developing businesses and ways to harvest our own food or produce our own food in these small communities, we're building a strong chain. So if you're able to have food producers, you have someone able to, use that food in a bakery or a restaurant. If you're providing for that community, then when tourism is back and tourism is there, they're able to enjoy that in a real way. So I feel like a lot of the work we're doing now is laying that foundation. And if we're able to lay that, a really good foundation, then it's only going to help when tourism comes. I hope that answers that question. Yeah, please let me know, Natalie, or anyone else, if you want a little more clarity on that. So.
I think I'm up before we move to the last question. Yeah, I think at Spruce Root we'll continue holding to this holistic view that relief, recovery, and reform are all needed. We'll continue thinking about and working on these questions. What are the enabling conditions for local businesses to thrive, businesses that respect people, profit, and planet? How can we serve those who maybe aren't able to be served by conventional banks? And what are the enabling conditions for our communities to become more resilient? I think to a degree, we've inverted the relationship between some things that are truly valuable and those that are tools. To me, capital and markets are tools, while human life and labor and the environment and the reciprocal relationship between the two are truly valuable to our continued existence on this planet. We need to think about how we use tools like capital and markets to enhance what is valuable to society and to the environment. Somehow we've been willing to use up people, human life and labor, and the environment to enhance capital. Investors, some of our leaders, the market frequently hold capital and capital expansion as sacred, but we need to put capital back in the hands of people stewarding the earth and communities. So what might this look like when visitors return to Southeast? Maybe it's a pledge by visitors to abide by the cultural norms and environmental requirements of local communities. Perhaps it's an invitation to visitors to voluntarily contribute to efforts like the Hoona Native Forest Partnership or the Keequong Community Forest Partnership or the Sustainable Southeast Partnership. An invitation to visitors to make a fair contribution to those who are maintaining and restoring the landscape that visitors are enjoying as they cruise on by. In addition to how a regenerative visitor industry might look like, I think we also need to continue working on localizing our economy, building up our food security and energy independence, and empowering our communities through opportunities for co-management to continue to be stewards of their lands and their waters as they have been since time immemorial.
Great, thank you so much, and that's an awesome wrap up on that question, Aaron. It allows us to kind of think of the word economy, its base is home, and to think about that as really the embracing of a reciprocal relationship with home and how we live there. So I want to leave a few minutes at the end for questions from our audience. So just really quickly, I was wondering if each of you would be willing to share just one message to everyone that's listening on the webinar today about what you're learning, or any takeaways, things we should be keeping in mind. Thanks.
I think I'm up first for that one. Yeah, I think a little nod to our Audubon hosts. I'd like to leave everyone with the idea of nested systems. So the idea that the economy sits within society, which sits within the environment. And what if we could transform our economy so that it helps regenerate ecosystems? What if we could transform our economy so that it helps our society become more equitable and fairer, to turn any waste into something that's valuable, or to eliminate negative externalities altogether? I think nature and people and culture are frequently overlooked and undervalued, making conservation and social services necessary. The market frequently doesn't capture the full value or costs of goods and services, but really there is a direct reciprocal relationship between us and nature. Creating more sustainable economies, I think, requires systems change, changing the patterns, structures, and mental models that are holding problematic aspects of our current situation in place. So at the systems level, I think we need to nudge patterns and structures. We need to shift away from being reliant as a state on oil revenues, or as a region on one or a few industries subject to the whims of global markets or pandemics. We need to shift material incentives and rules and regulations. We need to think about equity and how politicians and businesses can shift from thinking about power over to power to communities, workers, and voters. I think we need to emphasize how we can transform our mental models too. We need to make choices that are economically regenerative, more obvious and attractive and easy and satisfying. We need to make it easier for individuals to make regenerative choices. And all along, I think we need to keep in mind that there will be no systems change without organizational change. And there'll be no organizational change without individual change. So I think we all need to work to change ourselves and our behavior, and think about our role in influencing these nested systems.
I agree. Are you next, Zach, or am I?
I don't know. I've lost track of so I kind of am looking for cues if it's me. Go ahead, Mary.
Sure. Okay. I guess going off what Aaron said too is, when we're talking about, we all need to be regenerative. But I've had a lot of discussions about regeneration and what is it? And so I guess my message would be to each business owner that already exists, or someone who's interested in starting a business, is don't be afraid to ask questions. If you're not exactly sure what regenerative business means when it comes to your business, feel free to reach out to me. And if I don't know it, I'll pass you on to someone in our network who does. I think when we're talking about like sustainability or regeneration, people can kind of shy away from it because it sounds, I don't know, for me, it could sound intimidating. So I guess just don't be afraid to really find out what that means to your business. And as humans, sometimes we can't see our blind spots. So if you're asking somebody else, a lot of times we're really good at pointing out other people's blind spots. So just to kind of put that out there, don't shy away from questions, and make sure you reach out.
All right.
Oh.
No,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm screwing this up right now with the order. You.
No, it's all good, man. All right. Yeah. So I think that there's, again, I mean, I feel it's important to clarify that I kind of approach this from the video production standpoint. I think that there's a real value to when you're coming into someone's space, whether it be their business or their home or just into their lives, and you are attempting to document something, you're attempting to communicate a message or a story on their behalf. I think that just the nature of production, it can get kind of big, and I think that Alaskans are certainly familiar with production coming into their state and representing them and then leaving, and maybe not to be fair, I think that a lot of times people are very happy with how they were represented in like an Alaska TV show or in a documentary, but I think sometimes that can be very intimidating, and I think that people do get misrepresented often, and it's not necessarily malicious. It's just that when you have someone coming from another state or another culture, maybe they're only here for a short amount of time, they're on a limited budget, they have to film something very quickly, and they have to get a story put together, and they have to crank it out. There isn't always a lot of time to establish a relationship between yourself and the subject. And I think that the opportunity that I am seeing coming from this is that you have to, there's kind of like a value to being local. And if I were to want to, tell an individual story, whether as an artist or just showcase something in Southeast Alaska, if I want to do a good job of creating something that's authentic and transparent and intimate, and I'm doing it on someone's behalf, I think I need to form a relationship there. And I think that takes time. And I think that what I found with the pandemic is that it's forcing me personally to kind of like slow down and think about things a little bit more. I can't just get on a plane and fly back and forth and back and forth. So I think that this is an extremely valuable time for someone like myself to maybe take a little more time. If I'm coming to a town in Southeast, this is not, I really feel like it's a time when it's sort of best to hunker down. And in that time, you can form relationships that you wouldn't otherwise be able to form. And I think that with video being an intimidating, potentially negative force if it's abused, I think that it's very important to establish a trusting relationship with your subject, whether that be a person, like I said, or a business, or just even like a town. And I think that to basically having knowledge is one thing of like, reading up on a culture and what they do is one thing, but to have an understanding is completely different, and it takes time to achieve an understanding. So that's where I think that there's a value, I at least find for myself, in kind of being more of a local presence and being like, hey, I'm not just gonna. I kind of have to spend time with people during this pandemic as we all hunker down. And if I'm not going to stop filming, then I'm actually being forced into a opportunity really where a relationship is going to become more of a priority than just getting the job done. And I think that that is valuable when you're showcasing an individual or a community. So yeah, that's my thought about the value of keeping it local is the relationships.
Well, first of all, everyone speaks so eloquently. Sorry that I'm having to get the last word on this question. Everyone has such good answers. But I guess my message I'd leave is this. We were starting to see, and we would like to think that we were trying to come up with solutions by, again, going into this regenerative program in Sea, Alaska. But there were many initiatives that were, even last year, underway to start to create some sea change. And a few of those things that I think about, we've talked about localizing the economy a lot. That's been really important to us. And I think that many businesses that benefit from the visitor industry can think alike on this. So for example, there's so many great things when we talk about diversifying the economy that was spoken of a few comments ago. We're getting some great businesses that, I think of ones out of Juneau, like people making these kelp salsas, and you name it. There's people that pick berries in Sitka, and the family makes these jams and jellies. And that's just, that's not even to mention all the artists in small villages and in the larger towns. So Allen Marine, we understand we've got a large audience. We have, the ability to get very small businesses in front of a captive audience, with no marketing on their part. And so we have been taking it more and more seriously to the point where most of our retail program now is Alaska made and Alaska based. And then, so by us being in business, a smaller family business is in business and makes it. And that also is why on the flip side, this has become really devastating for a lot of people. But I think, another thing, we've worked with a few different carbon offset programs. Now, carbon offset is not the end all be all. We realize that, but it is an opportunity. I know, for example, in Sitka, they say your guests, and many guests are really interested in this. You add up what, your carbon footprint was for your vacation, from your whale watch to your plane ride up here, and you contribute to this carbon offset. Well, what Sitka's doing, and again, I know this isn't anything brand new or groundbreaking, but they buy a heat pump for a lower income family that is, burning oil. And so then you're getting money back in, and you're helping local communities and lower income. Those are fantastic programs. We were excited to do it this year. And then, but maybe what this moment gives us is to continue to take a breath here and think even more strongly on what can be done in those kind of realms. Once again, thanks for having us. One of the highlights of the year I was just thinking about is every spring, it's almost like the beginning of the season is an Audubon Allen Marine cruise in Juneau. And it kind of marks the beginning of everything. And obviously it didn't happen this year, but we appreciate the Audubon Society.
Thanks. We only have a few minutes left. I want to ask one question, and then I'll wrap up and let everyone know that there's a lot of great questions in the chat, and we can follow up with attendees via email. As it would love to hear from you about some of these further topics, and we can always have additional webinars on these discussions. So to any of you panelists, one question that came up is what activities you might be doing to advocate for or against state or federal policies that might have long-term impacts to the visitor industry in Southeast. And that could be land management policies or climate or economic policies. Are there anything any of you are able and willing to talk about in terms of policy engagement right now?
Natalie, I'm so sorry, but I feel like I missed part of that first part of the question. So policy in reference to what?
The question was in reference to climate policy or forest management or visitor use policies, any kind of policy work that any of you are engaged in right now that are kind of forward looking to long-term impacts on tourism or economic development in Southeast Alaska.
Gotcha.
I guess one thing that I would say that I know, and I can't say like we were actively in the weeds of this, but, and in fact, I know Mary, you might be able to speak to this too, but really identifying ways where, you know, someone in a village that is getting some tourism, some ecotourism, some small ship coming in, what are ways that we can actually cut down some red tape that could be barriers to them. You know, they have an idea and they want to do something. For example, Mary, I'm thinking about pesca tourism. You've got a hit to the fishing industry, but someone does have a boat, and there are people are really interested in that, like, fishing culture of Alaska. But someone has an idea and they've got a boat and they want to take someone out, and, you know, a regulatory body says, no, that's not allowed. You can't do that with a fishing boat. You can't have, unless they're a deckhand or things like that. Well, how do we make it so that we're actually friendly to these small places and wanting to start something that is groundbreaking and you know, it doesn't do any harm, it just helps entrepreneurial spirit in some of these places.
Yeah, really good example. You know, I feel like when it comes to like policy, it's probably one of the things that I'm weakest in. I can definitely, I've, you know, been on, you know, writing letters and help with stuff like that. When it comes to like the ecotourism and trying to get around some of the red tape, what Zach said is like being creative. You know, I think we had one ecotourism who they were able to, you know, get their insurance and make some things happen through a new insurance company through Airbnb. And so it's, for me, when it comes to policy making, it's really using and utilizing the networks that I'm within, and how can I help what they're doing. So whether they're writing something for, you know, more funds to come to Alaska, whether it be for outdoor usage or other smaller businesses. It's really being on the support side of it, like writing letters and supporting the policy that they're making. So I guess I'm saying that because I feel like it's not like my strong suit, when we definitely have people in our network that have been working on policies, policy writing and things like that I can support, but that's not my main job.
Yeah, and I would say like the big P, policy advocacy, is not kind of in our wheelhouse either at Spruce Root. We're not you know, knocking on doors or going to legislators asking for laws to be changed, but we do work more at the lowercase p policy advocacy. So like Zach mentioned pesca tourism. We're doing a project right now with EcoTrust to look at marketing and also any kind of administrative policy hurdles that are facing that industry. So in that sense, we're working to reduce the barriers to entry for businesses. And I would encourage any of the viewers to contact us if you're interested in pursuing pesca tourism as a new business venture for your fishing business.
And I feel I have to chime in, even though I am not involved in any policy making at all. But that does get me thinking, and it's as things are changing with how we're you know, doing everything in light of the pandemic. It's Yeah, it's certainly it's a thought-provoking question, and you know, being a little wishing I had something I could say to that and was more involved. That might be a first step for me. So I, you know, am doing my best to showcase the beauty of a place, and you know, I think that translates well into the preservation of it. And uh, I I guess, yeah, I appreciate the question, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to tell you, you know, all of the change that I've lent my talent to. So, yeah, something to think about.
Great, thank you all. Yeah, policy is a really interesting and creative space, particularly during the pandemic, when we're seeing a lot of policies that are cross-cutting, that are, you know, trying to simultaneously cut red tape and provide jobs and provide stimulus to local communities. And there's so many unknowns because no one has been down this road before. So I would encourage attendees who are interested in learning more about what policy action at the regional or the state or even the national level are happening, and in terms of helping with community development, business development, and some of the concepts that we've talked about today, like, you know, inspiring creative ways of providing small scale insurance to companies and startups. There's a lot of really cool intersectional work that's happening right now, and in shared spaces and alliances between groups of people where, you know, even months ago those alliances weren't there. So I think we're out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists so much. I learned a lot, and thank you to the attendees for your questions. And I'm sorry we couldn't get through more of them, but we'll follow up by email, and I'm sure all the panelists will be able to help answer those questions as well. So thank you, and have a great day.